People who've been in psych wards, what was your experience? For someone whose problem was figuring out what was real and wasn't. It was horrible. Left me questioning my life. Yeah. I think there should be more distinction than just addictions recovery and a general unit. I've learned that people living with mental health issues are probably the kindest and most understanding people in the world. I was a teacher in an inpatient residential treatment center. 13-19-year-olds. One young man was having a small meltdown in class. His fellow students rallied around him, encouraged him to call the nurse and take his afternoon meds early. They told him to go to his room and take a nap, and if he missed lunch they would make him a plate. Super sweet. Saved my life. The madhouse often felt less mad than the world. I learned the only difference between that place and the outside world was that in there, people had to admit they were nuts. Out here, everyone is, and pretends they're not. It was like summer camp, but with a lot of mentally ill people. Some girl thought she was a werewolf and would wander up and down the halls all night howling. Another girl would walk inside of the toilet, like literally in the toilet, then complain about not being allowed to wear wet socks. A lot of people wanting to start fights with each other. The main thing I remember was this overwhelming sense that things weren't going to get better for a lot of these people, which made me really sad. My best friend has been in a psych ward twice for suicide, but the first one was when he was under 18, and in our state anyone under 18 with mental illnesses is placed in the same facility. He was just your average kid but severely depressed. His peers and there were drug addicts and kids with really bad mental illnesses. His roommate, for example, was this big kid. He would scream at night, get violent, never towards my friend. But they'd have group sessions and some kids were like, I ran out of meth and tried to smoke the bed bugs, I had SX for drugs, mind you these are kids under 18. And then my friend would say he was therefore trying to commit suicide. Then the kids with the severe chronic illnesses. He said it was pretty eye-opening as well as frightening and made him feel better about himself. This is similar to what happened to my brother. He had a bad breakup with his first real girlfriend and didn't know how to take it. Eventually it got to the point where he was threatening suicide and sent her a picture of a tube attached to his muffler leading inside his car window. She called 911 and the cops found him hiding in a ditch and were able to admit him to the hospital since he actually showed suicidal intent. He spent 72 hours there and he said the group meetings really showed him how immature he was being and how good he actually had it. When you hear people living with real demons inside of them on a daily basis, how they grew up being molested by family members, how they watch their own kids get murdered, how they hear voices that aren't their own all day long, etc. And then it's your turn and your reasoning for admission is because your girlfriend broke up with you so you were threatening suicide? He said he felt like such an idiot and was so embarrassed about the entire situation. I am so thankful he was able to be admitted because had he not been, who knows what would have happened. I went on my own volition to a psychotherapy rehabilitation center. I thought I'd be in and out in 2 months cause I'm not as sick as others. I stayed 4 months. It was very helpful. Pretty much changed my life, but 4 months isn't enough to resolve every issue. It just kickstarted my mental health journey. What I really liked there is that it was okay to be not okay or to make jokes about our own craziness. We didn't have to worry about unknowingly offending someone or say the wrong things because we could openly talk about all that. This never happens in the real world. I detoxed from alcohol in a psych ward. It was terrifying at first, and I would have sold my soul for some vodka. But the staff and other patients were super helpful. I actually got schooled on my alcoholic thinking by a huge schizophrenic guy in a bathrobe, haha. He was very insightful and saw where I was trying to justify my drinking. The orderlies at the ward confiscated the Stephen King book I was reading when I checked in, though. Super bummer. It would have been a nice distraction from my skin crawling and the walls moving. I was never admitted into one. My cousin was and I hadn't spoken with him in a while. He told everyone he only wanted to talk to me. I went in there and I had 1 hour to talk with him. My aunt and uncle were heartbroken. and they asked me to ask him some questions for them. It was hard. It was kind of a reality check for me as I had just gotten out of high school and I'd never experienced something like this. My cousin was pretty messed up. And without going into too many details, it was very difficult to have a conversation with him. Kinda put things into perspective that mental illness isn't a joke or an easy thing to deal with. Overall, my experience was like having my reality turned upside down on me. I was raised by parents who wanted to shelter me. And this whole psych ward thing was quite the game changer for me. One of the scariest, most traumatic experiences of my life. I truly believed life was a lie. That everybody was an actor playing a role to mess with me. I mean everybody. From my mum crying during a visit because I didn't believe it was truly her, to the random workers and impatients who were clearly making underlying threats and hidden meanings with every word they spoke, to Vincent Kompany, the Manchester City footballer on Match of the Day that night, who was speaking to me through the TV after winning the league that day. It was a real life Truman Show, Shutter Island, and the only outcome I could see was my own death. I didn't trust anything or anyone, and to this day I still have lingering doubts and bouts of paranoia. This was in 2012 whilst I was suffering from drug-induced psychosis after a weird session of weed smoking. I was only an inpatient for 2 nights, but the after effects are probably lifelong, unfortunately. I'm a schizophrenic. I've been assaulted 3 times in a mental hospital. One girl I met said, "I just got out of jail and jail was better than this place." And that was by far the nicest mental ward I've been in. The others were pure hell. I'd rather be insane outside the hospital than in a place that's dangerous. The only reason someone should be in a mental ward is if you're suicidal or homicidal, as it's difficult to carry out those things in an environment where you have limited access to things. I got out today after 14 days in a ward. This is in Sweden though. I am so glad I got to go there. They really helped me turn my life around, yes. In only 14 days, and even if I have a long way to go before I am free from my depression, I am no longer suicidal and I can see the way forward out of my current situation. Super friendly and helpful staff. They really care about you. What has been written in previous comments about opening up to the other patients is very true. I brought a PC and a 4G modem so we could stream Netflix. Wound up having really nice movie evenings with the other patients. The best days of 2020 so far has been the ones I spent in the psych ward. A guy walked past me laughing and said, "Satan is awesome." Another time a woman looked at me and said, "Your husband beats you, doesn't he?" I was 19 and single. I spent a week in one a little over a year ago. The actual psych ward was really interesting. We were just a bunch of people that were really quirky with some super nice nurses that just wanted what was best for us. I was the youngest person on the ward, at 22, and 3 older black ladies that were also patients became surrogate aunts to me during my time. The bad part was the waiting period before I got moved up to the ward. No real beds. No real anything, and crappy food for 56-ish hours. Thankfully at least one of my parents got to be there the whole time for that part, or I would have gotten significantly worse. When I was 14 I was forced to go to the psychological department of my local hospital. I didn't belong there whatsoever, but the police thought I was suicidal. I wasn't. I kindly asked the officers to not bring me there, to which they responded they had no choice. I was put in the back of the police car and handcuffed for the duration of the ride. The first night I was locked in a cold room with a metal bed and padding on the walls. It resembled a jail cell. After eventually falling asleep they transported me to a traditional hospital room and kept me there with a guard at the door for a whole day. I just watched TV for 3 days after that and had occasional meetings with a psychologist, whom I told I had no business being there as a misunderstanding had taken place. Guess he finally believed me cause I eventually went home. It was stupid. This whole situation didn't cause me any psychological damage or anything. I'm fine and find it more annoying and embarrassing than anything. I kept to myself, but it was very scary. People worse off than me terrified me cause I worried I'd end up like them. I had attempted suicide with a bottle of sleeping pills, woke up there, was confused till I remembered what I did. It's scary. I'm a person who enjoys his privacy and not being around other people, but in there you have zero privacy and always in groups. More trauma than the original thing that brought me there. I went on a weekend first mistake. There were only 20 beds and 107 people were in the ward. I began crying. One of the aides got aggravated because I kept crying and told the nurses the noise was annoying and they put me to sleep. I was so doped up I repeatedly peed on myself. Aides got mad and basically drowned me in the shower. And dressed me in front of everyone. This ward was co-ed. I hated every bit of it. I would never go again. My mom requested me to be moved EOB pediatric since I just turned 18 4 days before. That was actually an amazing experience. Everyone is so much nicer in pediatric. In my experience, it's mostly been me getting drugged down because I was acting so erratic. When I'm manic I usually suffer from pressured speech, disorganized speech, or latch onto words because my thoughts were racing so fast. Some of the times, I've been quite aggressive to the point of hospitalization or just complete psychotic. During my time there, I've learned that many people in psychiatric wards in my country are willing to take advantage of mentally ill people and run them over by abusing their power. There was this caretaker that drugged and sexually abused several girls, including me, when I was admitted back in 2008. Other nurses and doctors would purposefully just dumb things down to patients or get away with stuff because they knew people would just view them as mentally ill, irrational women that just want attention. Lots of good experiences too though. So it's been a mix. Horrible. They knew on top of other issues I have PTSD from an evil stepfather and asked to please not let men come into my room, especially at night. The male employees kept coming into my room at night to check that I was sleeping. Didn't sleep for 4 nights straight and only fell asleep because they gave me a sleeping pill. Hated it and didn't get help really. I did get a nice big bill that I'm still trying to pay. And this was 12 years ago. I'm a veteran and a 20-year firefighter, retired. I was taken to the VA mental hospital after having a breakdown at work. I went in completely broken. I had seen so much death and suffering in my life that I physically and mentally could not function. I will say that it did help. Not completely, but enough to allow some semblance of normal. Most days were very heavy on coping mechanisms and how to realize where you are at mentally. Everything was done in group sessions. Of course everyone there was a veteran, so it was geared towards military experiences. Throughout my stay the doctors and therapists used the usual medicines and adjusted them accordingly. I was there 6 weeks and have been back once. It was honestly terrifying. I was locked into a ward full of strangers with no way of contacting friends or family beyond 5-minute calls during a short time period each night. I literally just sat around reading the books I brought with me. And I had to go through withdrawal from my medication since they had to take me off it. I would spend so much time in my room reading. They wouldn't call me for meals and just threw away my food. I was technically there voluntarily, but I was given the choice of either you go voluntarily or I will force you to go by a crisis counselor. Even being there voluntarily didn't mean I could leave whenever. When I kept asking to leave to be with my loved, they kept saying I would be kept longer if I didn't stop asking. I would wail through the night because of how scared I was, also a withdrawal symptom, and a nurse came in and was like, "Can you stop?" Double quote. I would never go back. Absolutely awful. It actually gave me PTSD that I struggled with for years. And I still can't have my blood pressure taken without tensing up because it reminds me of them checking vitals every 4 hours. But I'm alive today. And if I hadn't gone there I probably wouldn't be. And for that I'm thankful. Even if your reason for not killing yourself is just that you're scared you'd FCK it up again and get thrown back in a place like that. It's a reason. Scary. I went to see a friend who had a nervous breakdown. I was walking down the hall and just felt weird. I turned and a lady that was coming up behind me fast almost went to a dead stop. 2 seconds later same lady attacked a nurse. Never visited again. My mom worked local hospital psych wing when I was a kid. She's a nurse. A few people got violent and one punched a nurse, not mom. Lots of teens with suicidal ideation. She said the weirdest thing was a guy who blew out a long stream of mucus and stood in front of mirror to watch his reflection. Just let it hang there. She said she wondered what was going on in his head. I have a friend who worked in a state hospital for a while when he was younger. He's got stories. Guy who repeated everything in threes. Couple guys who kept trying to OD on water. Assaults on staff, and one guy who explored his backside rather thoroughly and suffered a cardiac event. It was simultaneously a wonderful break and a stressful nightmare. I got to stay in my PJs all day. Didn't have to wear shoes. I could read and draw and talk with the other kids there. It's where I learned origami. I very much needed it and it helped me a lot. Also, the bacon was delicious and there was a cool orderly who took us outside to see the snow and played Modest Mouse for us. On the other hand, every day was a reminder of why I was there. No razors. No privacy. And sometimes the other kids there would have outbursts that frightened me. You know those heavy-weighted plastic chairs? My first night, a girl threw one across the room in the midst of her rage. I couldn't call anyone but my parents, who told me to stop feeling sorry for myself. I knew if I exposed the depths of the problems I had, I wouldn't be able to leave. So I just scratched the surface in order to get out within a week. Overall, Springwood's juvenile unit gets a 5/10 from me. Obligatory, not me but my cousin worked there. She distinctly remembers 4 cases. 1. A girl of 14 who had to leave school because she was obsessed with doing things a fixed number of times. For example, brush 5 times, bath 5 times, etc. 2. A girl who would slam her head on wall when you weren't looking. Otherwise was normal. 3. A guy who returned from London and smoked so much weed there that his normal state became that of a high. Bullshit. I was 15 and they made me feel like I was faking my mental illnesses. I was released to my mother after screaming how I didn't want to go home. Went to the ER. Asked for a specific doctor. She was on the psych ward that evening. It was surreal as I didn't understand what was going on around me. This is the ER, right? Room next door had a woman sitting outside the door. Every time the patient did something wrong, she reminded him he wasn't allowed to do whatever it was he was doing. She yelled at him all night to stop it. Upon discharge, the discharge nurse asked why I had been admitted to psych. The rest of the weirdness became clear all in that one moment. They're horrible. I went to one after an attempt at suicide and they just fed me pills while we all sat in a room doing nothing. We weren't allowed to talk to each other or anything. We had no windows and couldn't even go outside. The staff there would watch you use the bathroom and shower. On top of that, we would get damn near zero food. For breakfast we got a slice of cold toast and 2 small sausages. That's it. It definitely isn't a good environment, especially when you're suicidal. I went unwillingly as I was afraid of what I might do to myself if left alone. Whoever thought putting a large group of mentally ill people in one area is probably a nutcase as well. I was told my roommate didn't talk and was likely mute, but as soon as the lights went out at night she would talk to herself in Spanish about butterflies. And I'm definitely not fluent, but it sure sounded like she was addressing someone. Then there was the violent morning singer. She had the most beautiful singing voice I'd ever heard, but was erratically aggressive. There was a nurse following her almost constantly as she kept trying to fight the other patients. And she really hated this one poor girl who was recovering from an OD. She was cool with me though because I liked bananas. I'm confused about it too, so I would usually just casually stand in between them whenever the singer felt like yelling at the other girl, and she'd get distracted and start complimenting me instead. In my experience, it was the other patients that left more of an impression than anything else. Everyone they had a story and I got to know the more social patients there pretty well in the short time I was there. The food was okay. They had a gamma cube and I played Mario Kart against drug addicts, other suicide attempters and a variety of other sociopathic issues. Then me and the other kids started throwing basketballs over the fence to see if they'd bounce to the interstate, and were quickly reminded it wasn't a rehab center, but a prison with nice features. TLDR, most of them are a joke and don't actually help anything other than provide a home for those that don't want to go back to theirs. I was put in there. A few kids who didn't like me said I was going to shoot up the school. I never said I would, but since there were 3 witnesses I was clearly going to do it, even though I was a straight A student and no history of disciplinary action with the school. Anyway, as soon as I got there, I started arguing with everyone about how they couldn't prove they existed. I called the one nurse Ratchet, and wore my bedsheets like a robe and pretended to be Jesus. Within a week the other patients hopped on board and we had this whole religious cult joke running. After 7 days the doctor said there was nothing wrong with me and to not come back. The food sucked, but it was like a week vacation from reality for me. Had a 10-day stay in a juvenile ward after a suicide attempt at 16. All the girls were in there for the same thing and the guys were there for being violent. Met a girl who thought she had 5 brothers, actually only had a little sister, and was a vampire. One guy was in there for blowing up a car. Most of them were actually pretty nice people. I visited my mother when she was last sectioned just one time. The building she was in housed around 10 people with various issues. The people there were so f***ing noisy. We were sat in a private room with my mum. And throughout the entire visit she could barely hear us, losing her hearing because of this man screeching at the TV for half an hour. Apparently he was like this all day. Mum was already psychotic when admitted. How was she meant to recover when bombarded all day? I was forced into it by police. Had to do the whole mandatory 24 hours stay there. It's not just for people with suicidal thoughts, it's also for people with legit other mental issues. Was kinda scary for me as you don't know who has what without talking to them. The worst part was just being there because you got to wait to talk to the therapist to be evaluated, which can take hours. Then you got to talk to the doctor afterwards to see if you can be released, which can also take hours. It was incredibly boring as I had nothing to do other than twiddle my thumbs together. I did ask if they had a book for me or something as I just couldn't be sitting there with my thoughts. This was the psych ward at a hospital, not an actual facility. I'm sure if I went there instead my experience would have been different. Tried to kill myself at 12 because my home life sucked. Ended up in the loony bin. 10/10. I got to eat snacks, make art projects, be around people my age, watch TV. Really, I just had more freedom and happiness there. And food. I spent time in one once as an involuntary admission. The entire experience was a huge waste of my time. I came out feeling no better than before I went in. I also worked in one for 2 years. Most of the staff are genuine and caring and wanting to help. The doctors do everything they can to milk your insurance for money. We accepted a lot of patients that we really shouldn't have, which made things hard for everyone, including the patients. I was in a juvenile psych ward and it really is like prison. You can't come out of your room until a certain time. Everyone goes in at a certain time. I was allowed to have a book, my teddy bear. Food was served on tan trays. Food was bland. Group therapy every day. Pet therapy. Individual therapy was bullshit. Random guy asking me when was the last time I thought about killing myself. That's about it. I had been in a short-term facility for a little, so I definitely understand the boredom part. This is excellent advice for someone going in for the first time though. I fell in love with word searches. Personally, my unit didn't allow personal technology, so a lot of kids actually ended up reading and playing more card games. I hope you stay in a good place. I attempted suicide. I'm only 15, so I was put in the kids unit. It was horrible. I cried for 6 hours straight when I got there. They took away my teddy. This one kid always screamed. There was another guy who's my age and he bragged about how many times he's been there. He also flirted with most girls and even me, and when I sat with my legs open he was like whoa, and he also tried to show me his dick. The cooks were mean to me when I said I don't eat red meat. Only one staff was nice. I also have a medicine I must take at exactly 9 PM. I had to argue with the nurse every night to get it. Now a month after I've gotten out, I'm not talking as much and I'm even more depressed than I was when I went in.